Nakita ko lang sa TikTok. How I wish I have the courage na gawin to doon sa terror. Kuno na accounting professors go back in college who gave most of her students low to failing grades, which leads me to shift course KSID ko makuha yung prerequisite subject. Okay, LNG sana if nagtuturo siya KS o hindi. Imagine, equivalent sa 6 units yung subject, 3 hours yung class, papasok siya sa room then magdi-discuss ng kaunti, TPOs magbibigay ng tasks, TPOs aalis then babalik sa classroom 30 minutes before end of class. Mag-phone then ipapapasa yung task papers. Then nung finals na SBhan kami ng classmates ko ng madami DW nag-fail sa subject niya kaya ayusin daw at ipasa ang exam. Like, you okay madam? Halos self-study KMIKSI she rarely teach, lagi siyang nandoon sa gymnasium kausap or kasama yung beb-eboy na varsity player. We even see it in sa ibang class para lang may maintindihan KHT papaano sa subject niya. Okay LNG sana kung napaka-self-explanatory ng accounting KSOHNDI, ang daming clauses and such. So ayun, I end up getting a very low grade from her while yung mga sip-sip sak anya got high grades. Lol, kung alam ko LNG na di pat ganun di pat nakipag-feeling close na LNG din ako sak anya. The reply is 100% correct. Teachers who boast that they have a high failure rate are trash. Your job as a teacher is to educate and teach, not to fail students. Yes, TBF she invited that clapback response towards her, the moment she said, hindi sa pagmamayabang. That shit's so completely unnecessary. Not a slam dunk brag she think it is. At this day and age, where disrespect can come in all directions, shape at form. Respect should be earned. Got to put these boomers in their right place. I hear that phrase a lot and it's so incredibly pointless cause you know they'll follow up with some humble brag. It's subtle as someone saying, I'm not racist but. What's funny is that, as the pic from up shows, there isn't anything worth bragging about when most students fail and could speak more on the incompetence of the teacher than the students themselves. Hindi sa pagmamayabang ha, pero ako lang naman ang pinaka-humble na tao dito. Shush. The best terror profs are the ones who strictly adhere to outcomes-based education, where your performance reflects the final Excel output of your grades. Yung tipong final boss talaga bago ka makakuha ng majors. I had a professor who was known to be a terror professor because he was known to fail students, but he was absolutely nice, listened to students, and taught well. He was only known for failing students, because he was extremely objective and the grade you got is equivalent to the amount of effort you put in his subject. Most of the students who failed his subject, not because they were lazy but due to personal circumstances, still appreciated him because it truly was fair. He comes to class consistently, he teaches, and what is in the exam is what was covered. That's absolutely it and it really was just a test of knowledge. Pakopya may ganito rin sa amin ngayon, terror talaga siya. Around 30% siguro pumapasa per sem sa subject niya may curve pa. Pero siya pa rin pinipili ng mga reticers since maganda yung teaching style. May professor ako na magaling magturo, and the exam is an actual test of whether you get the lesson or not, slightly high difficulty lang. Tapos bagsak yung mga inom, party people, sabi nila terror daw lol di lang sila nakikinig sa klase at puro party-party nasa isip nila, nagpapakalasing imbis na mag-aral. Had several profs in college na ganito. Upperclassmen told my batch terror daw sila. Turns out they were really quite nice and very encouraging, but they had high standards and are somehow very observant sa mga students. Like, they can tell what your strengths are and they will push you to make the most of it. One them is a friend of sorts now. Minsan nagkita kami sa Eastwood and nagchikahan the whole afternoon, haha. I believe this is just for a content. Not really an actual convo, since ganito naman talaga mga content ni Jed Ravis. But this is an eye-opener to all professors out there, na hindi na effective na takutin pa mga students na maraming bumabagsak sa subject niya. Nakakahiyang sabihin na ganun, bagsak ka pa sa teacher's evaluation kung ganyan. Same here. For me parang AI generated yung sagot ng student. But then yeah may point naman. Hindi naman tunog AI. Tunog articulate kung magsalita lang. May kilala akong ganyan magsalita at magsulat, sobrang well-read na tao lang simula pa pagkabata and sobrang cultured na tao. Still, pwedeng made-up convo lang siya for content purposes and it isn't really a convo between an actual professor and an actual student. Feel ko made-up convo lang talaga siya since matagal na yung sagot na, yan, meme na nga siya before. Jed Rivas is known for his text stories. You can look him up on TikTok. Talagang hindi po yan actual convo. Who uses M- in SMS? I only ever see those in sentences constructed by AI. Never in actual convos. I used to think professors who boast na nambabagsak sila is a flex. Now I'm in the workforce, isn't that a failed key performance indicator, KPI, sa teacher? Trabaho mo magturo pero walang naunawaan yung mga estudyante mo. Nag-i-invest ng hard-earned money yung mga magulang nung bata para lang ibagsak. These professors have the nerve to enforce a high standard in examinations pero basura naman ang methodology ng pagtuturo. The academy should look into this. Ginagawang power tripping circle jerk sessions lang ng mga instructor eh. True, it's like a engineer boasting na madami ng nagibang building kasi shitty yung plans niya at di nakasunod construction workers. Cause they are dumb. Marami sa college namin lalo sa ibang courses. Sila yung tito trope, either you pass or you fail. Na-realize ko na tamad lang talaga sila. When it comes to teaching style, mer lang. Lolye, imagine a project manager, scrum master where 70% of the projects they are handling are delayed because the people working on those projects are failing to do the tasks properly. You will not be sending an email boasting about that because you'd probably be replaced by someone else that is more competent and fit for the job lol. Last na may nagganyan sa school namin na student laban sa isang professor is umabot sila sa dean and after a month lumipat yung professor. And sabi ng professor namin is ang reason niya is daw di siya pinagtatanggol nung dean. Imbis daw nakampihan siya at I-kick out yung student ay pinagsabihan pa daw siya na ayusin ang pagtaturo niya. Which is tama naman ginawa nung dean kasi ilang beses na siyang nareklamo dahil may students na nagkaroon ng back subject dahil sa di niya lang gusto yung student or may nagawang malitas buong sem niya na pag-iinitan. Proud na proud pa yan na sinasabi sa mga students niya na madami na daw siyang binagsak na students. Saktong nakabangga niya na student is palaban talaga may lakas ng loob na barahin siya at iparealize sa kanya na mali siya. Buti na lang at umalis siya kaya di namin siya naging professor haha. Ang Jurassic ng thinking Can't believe instructors still think na effective sila if students can't pass their class. Well TBF, maraming subject sa college na kahit magaling ang professor, madami pa din ang bumabagsak sa hirap ng subject talaga. Sa case namin sa DLSU is accounting, kahit intro to accounting sobrang hirap. Minsan wala na sa professor, nasa subject na talaga. Minsan student din talaga. Last year lang binigyan ko ng reviewer mga tinuturuan ko sa college, yung nasa reviewer same na tanong sa exam as in pareho plus more. Less than 25% ang passing rate. The reason kaya binigay ko yung reviewer kasi sinabihan na ako ng acting dean na kailangang pumasa ng mga students kaya ibigay ko na daw yung i-exam. May bumagsak pa din. After that I refused to teach under that college, department. Sobrang lenient na nga ng gento eh. Ong mga totoong terror noon samin, one step harder ong mga tanong compared sa given problems, but still at the acceptable range. Law school professors left the group. Wala akong masasabi na negative sa law professor ko kasi sila yung literal na terror pero may matututunan ka. Lol, doon namin nakuha yung index card trauma. Ha 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 ha. Lucky you. I've had profs who'd only show up 3 times the entire semester, then failed 80% of the block lol. Ganyan yung accounting professor ko. Though she show up NMN every class pero di ko alam BKT laging umaalis almost the entire time. Board ba siya KSI 3 hours yung class namin? LMAO. This sounds fake. Ang totoong terror na teacher hindi ipinagmamalaki ang dami ng bagsak. These are usually very good teachers with high expectations and high standards sa students. These are teachers who frown on memorization and give exams that emphasize on analysis. These teachers feel frustrated dahil ang mga students ayaw ng problem solving or proving, tapos walang logic ang answers. They are frustrated na ang baba ng nakukuha ng estudyante. Kaso nasanay ang mga students sa true or false at enumeration exams ng high school at walang training sa higher order thinking. They appear terror because many students cannot cope with that kind of education, but the professor is usually just as frustrated as the student. Students love professors who teach like a high school teacher and give knowledge-based exams. Tingin ko failure ito ng education system natin sa high school, and hindi kasalanan ng students nor their professors. I have had teachers whom everyone calls terror, but in reality sila ang pinakamagagaling kong teachers. Pahabol. Nagturo din kasi ako, so that means I experienced being both a teacher and a student. I was lucky to have come from a good high school kaya I appreciated teachers who encouraged higher order thinking. As a teacher naman, many students, except those from good schools, do not really try to understand when I'm explaining. They just listen for keywords and jot them down, or they don't listen at all and just take a picture of the whiteboard. Not their fault, their training was to memorize and answer factual exam questions. Hindi sila trained to think. May mismatch sa goals ko at goals nila. I don't want to adjust to their way of thinking kasi walang learning na magaganap. Instead I teach them to think, but it is hard to undo 12 years of basic education focused on spoon-feeding and memorization. The good students love me, the rest think I'm a terror. I don't think such confrontation is needed. Dapat may org or program ang school na pro students na pwedeng dun i-report nila na si Teacher Jam. Imagine the possible repercussion nila na after niya masagot teacher niya. If there is any sort of retaliation, she can use the convo as evidence. Pwedeng i-korte yan. Korte LMAO, if legit naman ginagawa ng teacher. Kadalasan baplaks talaga mga students kahit anong turo di matuto. Yan reason why karamihan ng teachers ngaon ginagawang pangbobo na rin turo para mapasa lahat at di sila masisi. Imo tama lang talga ay bagsak if bobo talga. Depende though, it is hard to use a convo SS as an evidence. Although pwede ay reklamo sa school heads especially if maraming students ang affected, I don't think this is something worth bringing to the court. Baka retired na si Teacher Jam bago lumabas ang resulta. Ang hirap sa college, yung mga instructor level na expected mag-focus sa pagtuturo, walang background sa education. Master nga nila content nila, wala naman alam sa pedagogy, andragogy, classroom management, sa student psychology, at proper assessment of learning. Feeling mga professor na, tapos wala din namang research output. Actually, had a professor na inulanan kami ng credentials niya nung first day of class like she's a balik scientist, had her doctorate degree abroad, had this research experiences ganun. First year ako niyan so I expected na she must be a great professor, turns out na she sucks at teaching and class management. Hindi nga nasunod yung curriculum kasi iba yung lesson na tinuro niya sa syllabus. And comparing her sa medyo recent graduate na professor namin, mas magaling pa si recent grad magturo. Meron din akong subject na nabagsakan dahil hindi marunong magturo yung professor, magna cum laude nga siya pero expect niya lahat ng students kasing level ng utak niya. Pumapasok sa class pero ang classmates ko ang magbabasa at explain ng PowerPoint tapos siya uupo lang, makinig at bigay ng quiz. After ko nabagsak sa kanya nag-spiral out na ako into depression at nahirapan makapagtapos. Parang proud pa nga siya na daming bumabagsak o mababa ang grade sa subject niya. One way lang siguro nakabawi is sa teacher's evaluation pero feel ko wa-epek peren. Dati kong professor matalino rin. Nag-train ng quizzers namin on the national level. Pero yung mga approach niya, probably pang quizzer din mahirap intindihin yung tinuturo niya. Akala namin mahirap yung subject until nag-review kami for board exams. The professor there just made the subject somewhat very easy to understand. Like napa, yun lang, kami ng batch ko. Mas bet ko ang ganyang setup, feeling ko mas magkaka-edge ako sa trabaho pag ganyan ang kinagisnang kong way of teaching, kasi sa trabaho ko uso ang reporting and meetings, and that would be the best training for me, compared dun sa accepted way of teaching ng lahat na ipapamemorize sa'yo lahat ng terms. Honestly wala akong nagagamitan nun sa current job ko, kasi sa real world walang magbibigay ng answer sa'yo, you gotta figure it out, Which I think mas matututunan ko sa way of teaching ng professor mo hehe. Had a professor once na nagagalit pag may calculator. Take note hindi namin siya major pero may hardon siya pag may gumagamit ng calculator. Ngayon ewan ko nasa na yung kupal na weird na yun di niya alam mga estudyante niya mas malaki na kinikita sa kanya. Ha. Di ko din gets yung mga minor subject na kung makaasta or makabigay ng projects and assignments akala mo sila yung major subjects. Sila pa mas nagkukonsume ng oras kaysa I consume sa mas importanteng bagay. Yeah, these fuckers are overcompensating. I mean, how can you expect your students to love your subject kung para ka lang gago na nagtuturo dyan without explaining things properly? Oo na sige na pag college dapat mabawasan gradually yung spoon feeding. Pero yung iba kasi katwiran, tagalagay lang ako ng grade nyo. That being said, alam mo na agad kung anong klaseng professor meron ka. Yeah, these fuckers are overcompensating. I mean, how can you expect your students to love your subject kung para ka lang gago na nagtuturo dyan without explaining things properly? Oo na sige na pag college dapat mabawasan gradually yung spoon feeding. Pero yung iba kasi katwiran, tagalagay lang ako ng grade nyo. That being said, alam mo na agad kung anong klaseng professor meron ka. I remember the times when sobrang galit ang aming mga guro dahil sa sobrang baba ng aming score. They did their best in teaching us and yet we failed them. Sa ilalim ng galit, this line stayed, your failures reflect us. God, I miss them and those types of teachers. What I'm trying to say is, the reply is very correct. The teachers I referred to were actually great teachers, they really did their best but we hadn't tried hard enough. If you can't teach, don't boast on the failures of the students who were supposed to learn from you. On a side note, what if hindi si ma'am ang naggawa ng test paper? What if nag-warning lang siya na pinaghirapan ng exam? I had a professor who spent half of the time talking about his college days. Like pinagmamayabang niya na worst student daw saying that he used to cut classes and do shit tapos as a teacher ganyan siya. Pinagyayabang niya din na small porsyento lang daw pumapasa sa kanya. Hindi din naman ako ganun kagaling na student back then and working student ako noon so most of the time napapa-absent ako so nung neralis ko na halos kalahati ng oras ng subject niya napupunta sa kwentong barbero, nag-drop na lang ako. Haha. I remember so many, terror, smile lang 5, during my uni days. Trigonometry pero reporting, no follow-up discussions or what's over. She'd ask afterwards, class, may tanong ba? Wala po ma'am kasi wala kami nuggets. Pag nag-ask ka naman, sasabihan kang di ka ba nakikinig? Ending wala na lang magtatanong. Kanya-kanya self-review. Then proceed siya to other reporter, topic and proud siya tawaging terror professor. Minor subject na feeling major. Always late, di applicable sa kanya yung if 30 minutes wala pa professor, pwede na umuwi. You have to wait for her, minsan 5 minutes before time, bigla siya papasok at magpapa-homework research paper. Essay type lagi ang exam, the more wordy and lengthy, the more points. Major subject. More on buhay niya at mga anak niya lagi ang topic W, a little bit of discussion then back to her life na. Para makapasa ka sa kanya, BA Leach and since di siya nag-check ng attendance, BA bida-bida like Jollibee. Ikaw din dapat pinamakalakas na tawa pag nagjo-joke siya para matandaan ka niya. I don't like terror educators too. Nahihirapan ako emotionally kahit na prepared ako intellectually. I am an achiever pero hirap ako talaga kapag terror ang educator. Kudos sa bata for standing up. I wish I have the same courage and confidence na meron ka. Pero ang nakakalungkot lang dito, based sa ugali ng professor and how egoistic she is, possible na pag-initan niya yang sumagot sa kanya kasi naapakan ang ego niya. Naalala ko dito economics professor ko noon college. First day ng klase sinasabi na swerte kayo pag naka-75 dahil yan ay katumbas na ng 85 sa ibang professor, ang siste basura siya magturo as in wala kang matutunan. Ending binagsak niya half of the class then remaining half 75 ang grades except sa isang classmate na magaling 78 at isang maganda na binigyan ng 80. Style pa noon na wife na lang niya haharap sa bigayan ng grades, class card, para wala na siguro makaapela. This kind of profs are actually making you ready to the real world. Sobrang thankful ako sa terror clinical instructor ko noon kasi sa sobrang takot namin ma-fail sa major subject niya nagpersige ako mag-aral at naging lisensyadong nurse way back in the Philippines and here abroad. I was proud she mentored me paano maging isang effective na nurse way back. I remembered she said, "Time will come Charles, you'll be in between saving and killing a life, make sure you're on the right track," and it hits me. Sa mga Gen Z or anyone in school now hindi niyo kalaban ang teachers niyo, most of them really care about you. The serious facade of your teachers are just there para magpersige kayo sa totoong laban ng buhay. Hindi lahat ng rules sa school may kwenta and yes totoo yan pero when you follow it means meron kang self-discipline to follow. Walang rule naman sa school na nakaviolate ng pagkatao mo. Tama si student. Pag maraming bagsak sa klase mo kesa pumapasa, hindi dapat ika-proud ng teacher. It's the exact opposite kasi it means they failed as a teacher, hindi siya effective magturo. I will never forget my first terror professor, very strict pero he was inspiring. He was dubbed terror because he called out students who did not fulfill the potential the professor saw in them. Isa lang bumagsak sa class namin kasi di talaga pumapasok. Yun ang dapat na maging proud, hindi ang ganyang teacher. Again and again, blame falls on the teacher. We should not be wondering 10 hanggang 15 years from now what the future would look like. Not every crowd should be followed. This also applies to teaching. Just because most of the class is failing, doesn't mean it's the teacher's fault agad. It is always a case-to-case basis. NGI, fake scenario naman yan. Nakalagay sa bio nung nag-post, I write text stories. Pero that kind of scenario happens IRL. PS didn't know na POVLNG siya. I was super relate KSI sa mga ganyang klase na professor, teachers, instructors. I doubt a student would be articulate and brave enough to say such things sa GC mismo. That's why it's a made-up scenario. Pero basing on the comments, hindi siya imposible.